So just yesterday I had a discussion with a taxi driver, and I discovered that over 95% of what he earns is being wasted either in fuel or in maintenance. That is why in this video I bring you the 5 key points which we talk about. And stay tuned to the end of this video, because the fourth and the fifth point are actually one of the most important. The fourth point talks about the mistake that 99% of drivers do, and the fifth point actually the solutions which I propose to him. Welcome to this new channel. In this new channel, we talk about cars, the automobile sector, and electric vehicles. So if you're interested in this content, kindly stay tuned to the end of the video. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell not to miss any of our next content. So the first point which we talked of was the amount of fuel he uses. Why did this point even come about? Before I entered his taxi, the first experience which I actually discovered is that his taxi was actually smelling fuel. So I thought to myself, if only his taxi can have this kind of odor, what about the amount of fuel he uses on his daily basis? So I had to ask him, and I was shocked by the response. Once I asked him this question, he told me he uses at least 15 to 20,000 francs just in fuel to run kilometers such as 40 kilometers, just interurban kilometers. So I was very shocked, and I could imagine just to run this kind of distances, the amounts that he allocates just for fuel on daily basis. And I saw that it was so much, and he told me that some days he even spends more than that, because since he has even fuel leakages, sometimes he runs sometimes out of fuel in areas where he buys fuel and at even higher prices, not even respecting the normal fuel price allocated for the normal drivers. The next point which we talk about was the amount of oil he uses. And why did this point even arise? You see, just before I took his taxi, I saw him covering a little distance, and before he left, I saw a very huge amount of oil droplets on the floor. And even when I went into the car, before we took off, he had to have an oil change. So I took to myself, why not ask him this question? So once I asked him the question, "Sir, what amount of oil do we use?" And I was very shocked. He told me that he has oil changes on daily basis. Oil changes which his car consumes at least 1 liter of oil per day. If not, his engine will die. You see? So, and I asked him the question, what is the amount allocated, for just 1 liter of oil per day? And he told me he uses about 4,000 francs just for oil changes per day, every day. You see? So this is actually a big problem that this driver faced, and I thought that it was a good idea for me to ask him. The next thing that we talked about was actually his general maintenance. Because when I actually analyzed the amount of fuel he uses, the amount of oil he uses just for his vehicle on daily basis, I took a good idea to ask him, what is the amount allocated for your maintenance? And to the greatest shock of mine was that he didn't even know the amount that he allocated for maintenance, because he told me that he does his maintenance just at random. You see, he might be traveling through a distance, and then at a certain point he has a problem and he has to deal with that problem. So he didn't even know how much he allocates per day or per month on the maintenance of his vehicle, because just the amount that he uses for oil changes, the amount that he uses for fuel changes per day, not to talk about the little other things that he uses for to run his vehicle on daily basis, he couldn't even know about it. So he didn't even know how much he allocates for maintenance. And to my shocking experience was that he told me he sometimes even uses more in his maintenance per day, more than what he gains. Let me take an example to better explain this. Let's say he took, for example, an example that he was going through in an area where there was actually no one, there was no inhabitants. He was going maybe to carry some passengers in an area where it was not inhabited, you see, and he happens to have a breakdown at that particular point. He needs to actually go back now on foot to be able to find the different parts that are actually bad, to come back before having his car fixed. And you see, just the price for maintaining at this particular stage is very high and very costly. and for sure it will even be more than what he earns for a weekly basis. So the fourth and the most important point, and one of the most important point, as I earlier mentioned on this video, this point that about 99% of drivers commit is actually seeing a mistake and not taking it into consideration. You know, this driver actually ran into all these problems just because of negligence, just because he neglected so many little things that actually was happening to his vehicle. For example, why were there oil leakages in his vehicle? Why were there fuel leakages in his vehicle? Why was fuel smelling in his vehicle? This is due to maybe certain defaults that he didn't take into consideration that this happened. So if, for example, I was walking to his vehicle and I saw oil spillages, it's just because maybe the oil tank was leaking and he didn't take into consideration of fixing the oil tank, and he instead took the hardest part to instead be having a 1 liter oil change in his vehicle every day. You see, this is the hardest thing to do, but he prefers to do it that way, which is due to negligence. The next thing was the fuel. He didn't even consider that his car was expelling so much fuel, more than what he even uses. So he will see himself using fuel as twice more than what even he could use for a particular distance. The next thing even was that he didn't even plan how much he allocates for the maintenance of his vehicle, which all this arises to just negligence. He sees a problem but doesn't tackle with it. He prefers to go the harder way, to be changing half changes every day. The fifth point that we talked about were actually the solutions that I brought to this taxi driver. You know, we could talk about all these problems, but not proposing solutions was a great mistake, because I was actually asking him all these calculations to be able to propose him solutions, revolutionary solutions, which he can take into consideration. So the first thing that I talked to him about was the coming of electric vehicles. Yeah, the coming of EVs. Electric vehicles are vehicles that use fully electricity in some cases. You will see that with electric vehicles, all the first three problems will be tackled with. For example, since electric vehicles in some versions use fully electricity, there will be no need for the presence of fuel, for the presence of oil. The first problem that he had was the problems of fuel. So he had fuel because he had an engine. While in electric vehicles, you don't even have the presence of an engine because it uses instead a motor. An electric vehicle doesn't even use oil because due to the absence of all these different movable parts in thermic vehicles that use fuel. So this was the first thing that I proposed to him, because you will see that even to considering the cost of maintenance with an electric vehicle, it is actually very low. It is 80% lower than in the thermic vehicle, because all this maintenance come into play due to the presence of all these movable parts, the presence of the engine, the presence of the oil tank, the presence of the filters, the presence of the exhaust, and all these different parts. All this is being expelled in electric vehicles in the other version. And you might be asking me this question. Yes, it's true. There are some versions of electric vehicle who use both fuel and electricity. But you will actually also agree with me that the presence of this simultaneous way of driving actually reduces this cost to up to 50 to 60%. This is what I actually had to discuss with this driver. And if this content actually interested you, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe right now and click the notification bell. You can tell me in the comment section which video ideas you want me to produce for you in the next. I'll be coming to you in the next video with the 5 mistakes that most drivers do that you shouldn't fall into. Click this video here in order not to miss the next video. So